Let's talk about interrupting a client. Or really, let's talk about stop interrupting clients. Now, interrupting clients, this is actually something that comes under direct communication, ICF competency number 7, marker number 6. I'm sure that's the number one priority on everyone's mind to know where these markers are found. However, I do want to talk about interruption because it's, I think, most relevant around active listening and building a relationship. Think about the person in your life from high school to college who had low social and emotional intelligence and frequently, constantly interrupted. And not just to get things done, but because as soon as they heard something that they understood, is like as soon as they had this construct that they heard from the other person that fit into their mold of what is reality, what's most important, what's most interesting, as soon as that happens, they jump in. Instead of sitting back and listening, instead of sitting back and letting the other person express and letting you as their potential friend express him or herself very well, and they just jump in because they get this like validation from being able to share, even if it means that they trample the other person in their own words. That cannot happen in a healthy coaching relationship. In order to have healthy coaching and a space for the person to think and a space that feels safe and where rapport and trust is being built, intimacy is being built in this connection with your coach, we can't interrupt the client generally. Now, this is one of those things like closed questions where in the beginning of a coach's journey, it's pretty much best to completely drop the idea of interrupting, the idea of offering closed questions. In practice, try your best to completely drop these things. Now, as part of competency number 6, listening actively, marker number 6 says the coach allows a client to complete speaking without interrupting unless there's a reason to do so. Because sometimes we need to say to the client, hey, before you get too much into the storytelling around this, let's talk about what you really want out of the conversation. Interrupting them for the sake of helping the client get more out of the coaching is very different than when a coach interrupts the client because the coach just can't hold it in anymore. Let's hold off on building the skill of coaching interruptions by just setting aside interruptions pretty much completely in the coach training process. As you're newer to coaching, just set it aside. So that's the obvious thing. I think that's pretty obvious. If it's not, sometimes it's fairly hard to grow through stopping interruptions because we might not sense it in ourselves. That's where it's great to have feedback. It's great to assess oneself, to listen to recordings. Did I interrupt? However, the not so obvious thing when it comes to interrupting in coaching is what I'm really making this video about. We know just by instinct, it's a coaching relationship. You don't want to interrupt the client as they're communicating, as they're thinking out loud. But you just as much want to avoid interrupting the client when they're thinking internally. Now, this comes in two forms. After you've asked a question, there's let's say 5 seconds of silence. And that can be really challenging, extremely challenging for a new coach to allow that time to progress, allow that time to pass. This person, they don't get what I said. They don't understand. It was a bad question. It was a train wreck. I have to save them. Honestly, they could just be thinking, and it could be some of the most impactful thinking they have ever done in their lives. The last thing they need in that deep moment is for their coach to jump in and rescue them. You can usually tell if it's time for you to rephrase the question by them looking at you, and that 5 seconds maybe go by, and then like they give you some sort of sense on their face, like some sort of indication, I don't get it, or they say it. However, most cases, you'll see a person look up, they'll look around, and they're just thinking. When you see a client thinking, they are communicating internally. To jump in with an explanation for the question we just asked, or a clarification, an alternative question, or some sort of answer that they might need to hear from you as a coach, because maybe this is the right answer. Like, just set that stuff aside. Let them think in response to the question that you asked. However, there's another way that a coach can interrupt in the quiet, in the thinking time. And this happens right after a client has just finished talking. Maybe you ask them a really insightful question. They respond for like a minute with their thoughts. And after they've answered the question, there's silence. I think when I was new to coaching, I thought that silence was my prompt for communicating. That silence, though, is a moment of processing where the coach is processing and equally so, the client is processing. If you think about it, this person's verbally been saying things, and we often will verbally talk things through, but then there will be deeper implications of what we've said that we almost lightning fast, we put those things together in our brain. Oh, how does what I'm saying mesh with my values? Because now that I've said it out loud, man, I don't know if I could really be happy if I go this direction of quitting because of this value that I have around my family. And all of this might come after they've answered the question, but it's happening in their mind. They are being coached. So coach needs to be quiet. Like, that's a type of interruption. If a client needs 10 seconds of thinking after they've answered a question, stop. Like, don't coach. Cease your coaching because the coaching is happening. The coaching is happening because the coach is sitting back and watching the eyes. You watch the eyes, and when they return to you, that's your prompt. But while they're out there reading their thoughts, when they're thinking about what they've said, when they're putting their values and their perception and the learning and awareness that's coming up, their identity, when they're putting those things together in their minds, that's their time. That is coaching. And that's why sometimes a coaching session can, you might say like a master level coaching session. It might sound like the coach doesn't ask many things at all. It's like, what are they getting paid for? They're getting paid for their ability to watch the client think and hold back until the client is ready for the next stage. Oftentimes, this is going to happen within a second. It's usually good to give like an extra second. It's usually good to have about 2 to 3 seconds minimum as like your general minimum as a coach. However, even if it takes 20 seconds, let the time pass. Be thinking about your question. Be processing what they've said as well in order to be ready with a very relevant question for them. However, going back to the idea of active listening and the competencies and the markers of success of that competency, if they take 10 seconds, 20 seconds to process, don't go anywhere else. What just happened for you right there? What are you putting together in your mind right now? Saw you did a lot of thinking there. Your eyes were going crazy. What are you learning? That space is coaching. Delve into it. Dig into it. It's rich. The last thing we want to do as coaches is to jump in and take that away from a person. The ICF, when we turn in recordings, they only get the audio portion. And this is all fine and good. Maybe in the future they'll require video. But I do believe a way for a coach to really push themselves in terms of their growth is to make sure they're getting feedback and assessing a video recording of their coaching. That's where you get to see the eyes. And so in a recording, audio-wise, you might only hear the coach coming in after 2 seconds. But if you see the video, you would say, oh, the coach interrupted the client because the client was still talking to themselves. It's a distinction that doesn't get picked up in the current assessment process, but it's still, that's one of the most important skills of a coach, is to know when to jump in and when to not jump in, when it's right to just let it go and let the client think. I hope this is helpful. We'll talk more about interrupting in the right ways in the future, and there's plenty of more things to talk about when it comes to active listening. Let's get to work on that. Thank you for tuning in. Keep coaching.